When two security officers tried to remove a black woman from her daughter's graduation, no one expected 6 Navy SEALs to rise from the crowd and stop the entire room without saying a word. Vanessa Harlow didn't expect anyone to recognize her when she pulled into the parking lot behind Westridge Academy. The building looked like most private schools in smaller Oregon towns: weathered stone facade, ivy climbing the walls, flags fluttering over the entrance, students loitering near the auditorium doors. It was already crowded, parents in formal attire, siblings holding signs, a grandfather leaning on a cane. Vanessa parked her vintage Mustang near the oak trees and stepped out, smoothing the lines of her crisp navy uniform. Her shoes gleamed with a mirror shine, not because she was trying to show off, but because there were things she didn't know how to do halfway. She paused, looking around. Her posture stood out, upright and firm. Her face, though calm, carried the stillness of someone who had seen life from too many angles. She had flown 6 hours from Virginia to make it to her daughter's graduation. She could have driven, but flying gave her time to prepare mentally for returning to the town that had never fully accepted her. Vanessa opened the car door and pulled out a small photograph from the glove compartment. It was old and worn, with a slight tear in the corner, her husband holding Zara when she was just a baby, before the IED in Fallujah took him from them. She slipped it into the inside pocket of her jacket. "I promised you," she said softly, "I wouldn't miss it." The walk to the entrance was slow and intentional. Every step carried meaning. Her chest filled with something she didn't have a name for, but it lived somewhere between pride and ache. Inside, the auditorium was packed. Plush seats filled the floor, balconies already overflowing. The air smelled faintly of perfume, polished wood, and anticipation. It was noisy, chaotic, alive. Vanessa showed her printed ticket to a volunteer near the door, a short woman with a clipboard and headset. The woman squinted at it, nodded quickly, and pointed toward the 3rd row on the right side. "You're good to go, family, seating up front," she said. "Appreciate it," Vanessa replied, her voice steady. She made her way to the row, catching glimpses of other families as she passed. Some folks looked at her, did a double take at the uniform, then turned away like they hadn't. One man gave her a small smile, then whispered something to the woman beside him. Vanessa didn't react. She'd been black, female, and in uniform for a long time. She knew what some looks meant and what others didn't. She found her seat and sat down. The chair was velvet, slightly worn. She adjusted herself without complaint. In front of her, the stage was set. Banners hung across the auditorium wall, Class of 2025 in big gold letters. A few board members stood near the podium checking notes. Vanessa glanced at the rows of students lined up at the far end of the auditorium. Zara was somewhere in the middle, tall and graceful, with her father's eyes. 18 years gone, just like that. She remembered holding her. The night she was born, still in uniform, dirt still under her fingernails, she'd flown in from Baghdad with only 3 days leave, and now here they were. She sat, barely blinking, soaking in the moment. Behind her, people continued filing in. Chairs creaked, programs rustled. Someone laughed too loud. A woman dropped her purse and muttered under her breath. None of it touched Vanessa. Her world was narrowed to the stage, the rows of young faces, and the weight of the photo against her chest. Then the music started, pomp and circumstance, and the crowd around rose to their feet. A few students looked nervous, others beamed. Vanessa stood too, shoulders squared, arms at her sides. The national anthem followed. Everyone placed hands over hearts. Vanessa didn't move. She didn't need to. Her whole presence was a salute. She thought of her husband again, how he would have cried through the whole ceremony, how he would have fixed Zara's hair 3 times before letting her leave the house. Her eyes stayed forward. But as the last note of the anthem faded, Two uniformed men began walking down the side aisle, and they were heading straight for her. The two security officers moved with purpose. They weren't police. Their badges read Westridge Security Services, and their uniforms were standard black blazers over white shirts, earpieces, radios on their belts. Neither of them looked older than 35. One was tall and broad-shouldered with slicked-back hair and a tight expression. The other was shorter, wiry, and checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Vanessa noticed them right away, but didn't flinch. Her training taught her long ago that stillness was often more commanding than movement. She kept her eyes forward, her hands resting loosely on her lap. The taller officer stopped beside her and leaned down just enough to be heard. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a low voice. "We're gonna need you to come with us." Vanessa slowly turned her head. "Is there a problem?" The shorter one stepped forward. "Yeah, this section's for families of graduating seniors." Vanessa blinked, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the same printed ticket she'd shown at the door. "This is my seat, 3rd row, right side. Family seating confirmed." The taller officer didn't even look at the ticket. "We got told it's reserved." Vanessa didn't move. "It was reserved when I sat down, too. You want to tell me who gave that order?" The shorter officer shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't expecting a calm, clear voice. "Look, it's not a big deal. There's some extra seats in the back." "Let's not make this anything. It doesn't have to be." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, just quiet calculation. "I flew 6 hours to watch my daughter walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here." A few heads had started turning. A man 2 rows over nudged his wife and nodded toward them. Someone in the balcony tilted their phones slightly, maybe recording. The taller officer straightened up and looked around. "Ma'am, I'm gonna ask one more time." "You can ask all day," Vanessa said, her voice lower now, firmer. "I'm not moving." The shorter one sucked his teeth. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying." And there it was. Vanessa looked at him fully. That phrase wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about policy. It was about something older, something quieter, something that had followed her all her life in boardrooms, waiting rooms, front porches, and even the base cafeteria. Just behind a smile, just under a whisper, she didn't respond. The air shifted around them the way it does when people start sensing a line has been crossed. The taller officer noticed it too. He adjusted the radio on his hip and muttered something into the mic, never breaking eye contact. Vanessa stayed seated, staring forward like the conversation had ended, because for her, it had. A man seated beside her, older and pale-skinned, leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Don't you let them move you." She nodded once, acknowledging him but saying nothing. She didn't want to make a scene. She wanted to watch her daughter graduate like any other parent, but the officers weren't finished. The shorter one lowered his voice again. "Look, you got a problem. Take it up with the administration office. We got our orders." Vanessa turned her head toward him once more. "You have a name, son?" The officer blinked. "It's Officer Bennett, not son." Vanessa replied, "Your private security." The taller one, Dawson, stepped in. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up." He didn't finish the sentence because that's when the auditorium door at the far end clicked open and 6 people walked in. No uniforms, no badges, just firm postures, squared shoulders, and faces that said they'd been through worse things than awkward stares and misjudged instructions. They didn't walk in together. They filtered in one by one, taking different spots like they weren't there together. But anyone watching closely could tell they moved the same, watched the room the same, sat the same, still, steady, and alert. Vanessa didn't look back. She didn't have to. She knew exactly who they were, but the officers didn't, at least not yet, and they were about to find out. Vanessa kept her focus on the stage. Her jaw didn't move, but her mind was turning. She wasn't angry, not yet, but something inside her clicked into place like a switch she didn't use unless she had to, the one built for survival, for balance, for patience under pressure. The two officers didn't leave, they hovered. It was the kind of hovering that wasn't about doing a job, it was about trying to remind someone they had power. But what they didn't understand was that Vanessa had lived in places where power was life or death, not some auditorium with velvet seats and a sound system. Bennett shifted his stance again. He leaned closer, voice quieter this time. "I'm trying to do you a favor here, all right? This doesn't need to get ugly." Vanessa's eyes flicked to him. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." A pause. Bennett drew back slightly, as if reconsidering his next move. But Dawson was less subtle. He didn't like being challenged. His hand hovered near the radio again. A few rows behind, a woman stood up slowly. Nobody noticed at first. She didn't say a word, just crossed her arms and stared. Cropped hair, athletic frame, eyes sharp. She took a seat near the aisle without removing her gaze from the scene. In front of her, a second person stood up on the opposite side of the auditorium. Same posture, calm, intentional. Then a third. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Vanessa knew them all. She didn't turn to look because her instincts didn't require confirmation. She had led these people through mud, gunfire, and silence darker than most people could imagine. Dawson leaned down again, this time with something in his voice that wasn't there before. "Listen, ma'am, you're making this into a situation." Vanessa turned her head slowly and deliberately. "And you're not listening." Dawson's hand twitched toward the radio again, but before he could say a word, a voice broke the tension from 10 feet away. "Is there a reason this woman's being bothered?" It was clear, calm, controlled, the kind of voice that doesn't rise to get attention. It drops just enough to make everyone else stop talking. It came from a woman standing in the center aisle, tall, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, fitted black suit over a white shirt. Her name was Samantha Rivera. She was the one Vanessa had pulled from the wreckage in Fallujah, dragging her across 200 yards of sand while bullets rained down like gravel. Dawson looked up, caught off guard. "Who are you?" Rivera didn't answer. She stepped forward. "I ask you a question." Bennett raised a hand. "Ma'am, we've got this under control." "No," Rivera said, sharper now. "You don't." Another person stood up from the far balcony, then another. 4 of them now. Vanessa remained seated, still quiet. The entire right side of the auditorium was now watching openly. A girl pointed. A teacher tried to wave attention back to the stage, but nobody was looking at the diplomas anymore. Rivera took one more step forward. "You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this worse." Dawson glanced at Bennett, who looked less confident by the second. It was clear now they hadn't expected backup, especially not backup like this. "I don't care what your orders were," Rivera said. "You don't put your hands on that woman. You don't tell her to move. You don't ask again." The silence in the auditorium felt tight, the kind that didn't come from fear but respect, a quiet respect that started to swell as more people realized what was happening. Vanessa finally looked up at Rivera and gave the smallest nod. Not a thank you, not a request, just recognition. Rivera's eyes softened for a moment. Then she stepped back and took her seat again, arms folded. But the tension hadn't left the air, not yet, and the people watching were waiting to see what the officers would do next. The auditorium faded, the stage, the banners, the faces all blurred into the background of Vanessa's mind. Her eyes were still open, but her memory yanked her backward 15 years ago to Iraq. It was late afternoon in Fallujah province. The sun didn't set gently there. It crashed down like a hammer, turning the sand to rust and the air to steel. Vanessa, a lieutenant commander back then, had just finished briefing her unit when everything went sideways. A roadside IED blew under their convoy, flipping the lead Humvee like a toy. Dirt and metal rained down before anyone could scream. Then came the gunfire, not scattered, but coordinated. Vanessa didn't think. She moved. She ducked behind what was left of a doorframe, surveying the chaos. Smoke clouded the edge of the valley, but she saw 6 people down, trapped behind the burning wreckage of a second vehicle. Most were pinned. One was already trying to crawl forward, dragging another by the vest. That was Samantha Rivera. She had just 3 months in country and a bullet through her shoulder. Vanessa bolted, no hesitation, no radio call. She ran through open ground, dodging bursts of gunfire, sliding into cover behind a blown axle. Rivera looked up, blood on her temple, gasping. "You're bleeding," Vanessa had said. "You noticed?" Rivera coughed. Vanessa grabbed the straps of the downed soldier beside her, Tomas Reyes, and began pulling. Rivera pushed from behind, wincing with every inch. "Where's Katri?" Vanessa shouted. Rivera pointed weakly. "Left side, under the hood." That's when Vanessa saw her, a young SEAL pinned under part of the engine block, leg trapped. She was yelling for help, but too far gone to move. Without pausing, Vanessa told Rivera, "You keep low and move when I move." Rivera nodded. That's when she really started to understand what leadership looked like. Vanessa sprinted across again. Her foot hit gravel, then bone, but she didn't stop. She slid to Katri, crouched low, and gripped the edge of the mangled hood with both hands. It wouldn't budge. "Commander, don't," Katri shouted. I'm good. You're not staying here." Vanessa braced one foot, dug deep, and lifted. Her shoulders strained, her ribs ached, the metal groaned, but it rose just enough for Katri to yank her leg free. They fell back together, crawling toward the ridgeline. Gunfire cracked overhead. Rivera returned with Reyes, limping on her good leg. 2 others followed, Winters and Novak, faces blackened with ash, rifles at the ready. When the firing stopped, there were no cheers, no victory speech, just silence and breathing. All 6 of them were alive. Vanessa was the last to check out. She stayed on rear watch until the dust settled and the medevac arrived. She didn't speak for a long time after that, but Rivera remembered they all did. After that day, there was never a doubt. If Vanessa asked for anything, anywhere, anytime, they'd be there, no matter what. Back in the auditorium, Rivera sat quietly in her chair, eyes fixed on the officers still standing near Vanessa. She wasn't thinking about war. She was thinking about promises. The woman who had dragged her out of a war zone was now being harassed in front of a high school stage for trying to watch her daughter graduate. She clenched her fists. Another SEAL, Devin Walsh, walked in and sat 4 rows back. Then, Layla Katri found a spot along the right side balcony. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Vanessa glanced toward the back of the auditorium. Now, just briefly, her eyes met Walsh's. That was enough, but the officers didn't understand what those looks meant, not yet. And the moment they made the next move, they'd learn real fast. The ceremony pressed on, at least on the surface. Names were still being called. Families clapped, some too loudly, trying to cover up the tension that now thickened the air. But the attention had shifted. Eyes that had once been glued to the stage now kept drifting toward the 3rd row on the right, where Vanessa Harlow sat like a statue and 2 officers stood like they didn't know what to do next. Dawson glanced toward the front, where a school official tried to get his attention. The woman looked nervous, mouthing something and gesturing subtly toward the officers, but Dawson shook his head. He wasn't ready to walk away. He'd started something, and his ego didn't know how to back down. Bennett shifted his weight again, his jaw working harder now, clearly uncomfortable, but he hadn't walked away either. "Ma'am," Dawson said again, this time louder. "This is your last warning." Vanessa didn't move. To do what, exactly? Dawson stepped forward, leaning in so close his belt brushed Vanessa's knee. "Stop making a scene. We don't want any trouble. Just move to the back." Vanessa turned her head and looked him dead in the eye. "You're the only one causing trouble." Dawson's nostrils flared. That's when it slipped. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a private school, ma'am, not your base." A hush fell across the rows around them. A little boy stopped squirming in his seat. A mom with a camera froze mid-zoom. Even Bennett took a half step back, like the words had landed heavier than he expected. Vanessa didn't blink. She took a breath, not to calm herself, but to stay grounded. "You need to walk away." Dawson didn't. Instead, his hand dropped to the front of his belt, not on a weapon, but near enough to feel threatening. And that's when Rivera stood up. She didn't yell. She didn't posture. She just stepped into the aisle, slow and focused, like the conversation had become her business now. The auditorium wasn't dead silent, but close. Rivera's voice was clear. "If you touch her, you'll answer to me." Dawson turned his head. "And who the hell are you?" Rivera took another step forward. "The woman who's telling you this ends right now." One of the board members noticed what was happening and whispered something to the headmaster. An assistant headmaster got up and started moving toward the back of the auditorium, probably calling someone on the walkie clipped to her side. The school staff was finally realizing this wasn't going to die down. Quietly, more SEALs rose from their seats, spread across the room, no formation, no spoken cue, just a unified instinct that kicked in all at once. By now, all 6 were standing. Dawson looked around, realizing they weren't just dealing with some angry parent. Something was different. These people didn't fidget. They didn't shift from foot to foot. Their presence filled the space like pressure before a storm. Rivera took a step closer. "You've got 2 choices. Walk away now or watch this go somewhere you don't want it to go." Bennett's voice finally cracked through. "Let's just back off, man." But Dawson still hesitated. Vanessa spoke again, not to Dawson, but to Rivera. "Don't waste your breath. He already made his decision." Rivera didn't smile. She just lowered her voice one last time. "Don't mistake silence for weakness." Finally, Dawson stepped back. Not much, but enough. His hand dropped away from his belt. His face burned, but he was outnumbered and outclassed. The headmaster appeared near the aisle, whispering quickly to the officers. Whatever she said was quiet but firm enough to send them both walking toward the back exit. They didn't look at anyone on their way out. Vanessa exhaled, slow and steady. Rivera sat back down without a word. All 6 SEALs remained standing, but the moment still hung in the air. Zara Harlow was watching everything from the lineup of students, her hands clenched at her sides. She had seen the 2 officers walking toward her mother from the minute the anthem ended. At first, she thought maybe it was just routine. Maybe they were helping someone find a seat, but something in her chest told her different. Then she saw the way her mom sat so still, so composed, but locked in. She'd seen that look before, the same one she'd caught when she was 12 and came home crying because someone at school had said something they shouldn't have. Her mom didn't raise her voice then either. She just sat with that same expression, like steel that refused to bend. Zara kept her eyes on the scene as best she could from her place in line. She couldn't hear what was said, but the body language told her enough. She saw the officers standing too close, saw her mother calmly staying seated, and then she saw a woman stand up, a tall woman in a dark suit, and somehow Zara knew that wasn't just a parent. That woman knew her mother. The way she moved, the way she placed herself between the officer and the row, it was clear she wasn't there for drama. She was there for Vanessa Harlow. Then another person stood, and another. It wasn't loud, but it was like the temperature in the room shifted. Everyone was watching now. Zara's heart beat faster. She wasn't scared. She was something else, torn between pride and fire. She had grown up hearing pieces of her mom's service. Stories, not the gory parts. Her mom kept most of those to herself, but bits here and there. A buddy who sent birthday cards every year, a scar that came from somewhere out in the dust, a box in the attic marked Fallujah that nobody ever opened. She never knew the names, never saw the faces, but now they were here, standing like they'd been waiting for this moment, like they'd never stopped having her mom's back. Zara blinked hard, pushing down the burn behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now. The line moved forward. A few names were called. The clapping picked back up slowly, like someone had hit play again after a pause. But the room wasn't the same anymore. The energy had shifted. It wasn't about decorations or speeches. Now, it was about respect. One of the assistant headmasters tapped Zara's shoulder and said something she didn't hear. She just nodded. The student next to her leaned over and whispered, "That's your mom, right?" She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The entire auditorium had seen it, and now everyone in that building understood what kind of woman Vanessa Harlow was. In the audience, Rivera remained standing. She didn't look around for approval. She wasn't scanning for attention. She was watching Vanessa, still seated in the same velvet chair, hands resting on her lap, eyes locked on the stage like nothing had happened. But something had. The rest of the SEALs stayed on their feet too, not posturing, just present. Their silence spoke louder than any microphone ever could. A few parents clapped louder now with each name, almost as if they were trying to make up for the tension earlier. The auditorium had become a living thing, stirred awake by a moment of injustice, held steady by the weight of honor. Vanessa remained still, not defiant, not bitter, just present, a mother watching her daughter take one more step into adulthood. But the moment that would break through all of it was still coming, and when Zara's name was finally called, the room wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. The line was moving faster now. Some students were still fidgeting, adjusting caps, whispering jokes under their breath, trying to enjoy the moment. But Zara wasn't in that space anymore. Her mind kept flashing back to her mother sitting alone, surrounded by faces, but completely centered in that chair like it had been built just for her. There was something about how she held herself, calm, quiet, unshakable, something about the way those people, those warriors, rose around her without needing to be asked. Zara realized for the first time that she didn't really know the full weight her mother carried. Sure, she'd seen the pictures, the medals in the old wooden box, the folded flag tucked into the bookshelf in the living room, but those things never really spoke. They just sat there like relics. Today they walked. Today they stood. The assistant headmaster called out the next name, then another. Zara was 3 people away from the stage. She wiped her palms on her gown, tried to slow her breath. The boy in front of her turned and grinned nervously. "You ready?" Zara smiled a little more than usual. She stepped forward. On the other side of the auditorium, Vanessa leaned slightly forward. Her eyes never left the stage. She didn't clap for every student, not out of disrespect, but because her focus had narrowed to the girl in the white robe with the gold and blue honor cords, the girl who looked so much like her father. 1 name, 2 names, then the announcer paused for a second, cleared her throat, and spoke with a bit more weight than before. Zara Harlow. The name echoed. There was a beat of silence, half a second, maybe less, before the room erupted in clapping, whistling, cheering. But what stood out wasn't the volume, it was the rhythm of it. The sound wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate, coordinated, deep. The 6 seals still standing raised their hands and applauded in perfect unison. Each one clapped with force, not for performance, but as a salute without the salute, a gesture that said, "We see you, we see your mother, we honor both." Zara walked across the stage slowly, chin high, steps steady. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't nerves, it was pride. And not just pride in herself. It was the pride of knowing exactly who her mother was and what it meant to carry that last name. She took her diploma from the headmaster, shook her hand, and turned toward the audience. Her eyes scanned for one person and found her. Vanessa didn't wave, didn't stand. She just met her daughter's eyes and gave the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Zara nodded once and stepped off the stage. The applause still hadn't died down. Parents who hadn't said a word all ceremony were now clapping hard. Some stood. A few wiped their eyes, not sure exactly why, but feeling like they'd just witnessed something that mattered. Vanessa sat back in her chair and let the moment wash over her. She wasn't the kind of woman to cry in public, but inside something loosened, not grief, not pain, just release. The kind that only comes when the circle feels complete, even if it never really is. When mother and daughter met in the courtyard after the ceremony, Zara asked, "You okay?" Vanessa nodded. "You?" "Yeah," Zara said. "They tried to move you." "I know. I was ready to walk off that stage, Mom." Vanessa placed a hand on her shoulder. "And that's why you didn't. Because you knew I could handle it, and you handled your moment like a woman." Who were those people that stood up? They're people I bled with, people who know what loyalty means, people who don't forget. Later, in the car, Zara asked, "Why didn't you say anything to those officers? You just sat there." "Because I don't have to stand up for who I am, and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. That moment today, what those men tried to do, it wasn't new. But how we respond, that's what defines us." "But they disrespected you in front of everybody." "Yes, and everyone saw it. But they also saw 6 people who had every reason to be somewhere else stand up, not because I asked, but because they knew what that moment meant." Vanessa pulled out the photo of Zara as a baby. "I carried this through Fallujah. I carried it through losing your father. I carried it here today not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me of what's worth protecting. You always knew who had your back." "I didn't need to know, I just had faith. Real friends don't vanish when things get uncomfortable. They show up and they stand. I want to be like that, like you. You already are. You walk that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal your moment." As they drove away, the memory of what happened wouldn't fade anytime soon. For Zara, that day marked something greater than a diploma. It was the day she realized womanhood had nothing to do with noise and everything to do with how you carry yourself. When the world stops watching, some people shout to be seen, others just sit in silence and are never forgotten.